Last week, something happened in Washington that should have set off alarm bells across the political spectrum. A sitting president of the United States personally called a Republican senator and unleashed a torrent of profanity and threats against her. Not a Democrat, not a journalist, not a political adversary, a member of his own party. The reason was simple and revealing. She voted to limit his power, and she was not alone. That vote was not an accident. It was not symbolic, it was not performative, it was deliberate, coordinated, and deeply consequential. Right now, something is unfolding in Washington that has not happened in years. Republicans, Donald Trump's own Republicans, are quietly, methodically, and increasingly openly organizing against him on the single most dangerous issue any president can touch: the authority to take the United States to war. This is not cable news drama. This is not a leak engineered to juice a news cycle. This is not anonymous concern whispered to reporters and forgotten 48 hours later. This is a group of lawmakers who have concluded that loyalty has limits and that those limits have now been crossed. What follows is not simple. It involves emergency powers, threats against allied nations, constitutional standoffs, internal party rebellion, and a president who treats every restraint as a personal attack. But by the end of this, the stakes should be unmistakable. What is happening right now could define how power works in the United States for decades to come. Picture Washington late at night, phones buzzing across Capitol Hill. Staffers whispering in corridors, senators refreshing secure briefings and public feeds, double, checking what they are seeing because it doesn't quite register. The president is not attacking Democrats. He is not targeting the press. He is enraged at his own party, and for the first time in a very long time, his own party is pushing back. Most Americans have grown understandably cynical about political resistance. For years, what passed for Republican dissent amounted to theater, carefully worded statements, performative concern, a furrowed brow in front of cameras followed by total compliance when it mattered. That pattern trained the public to expect collapse, not confrontation. This moment is different. What is happening now is not rhetorical, it is legislative. Republicans are actively working to block presidential authority. They joined Democrats to advance a war powers resolution, a formal legal mechanism designed to restrict the president's ability to take military action without congressional approval. That is not a policy disagreement. That is a declaration that Congress believes the president himself has become a risk. Think about the gravity of that decision. Members of the president's own party looked at his conduct and concluded that legal guardrails were necessary to prevent irreversible harm. That is not how functioning alliances behave. That is how institutions intervene when they believe something has gone dangerously off course, and Trump's response tells us everything we need to know. He did not reach out. He did not attempt persuasion. He did not negotiate. He exploded. According to multiple reports, Trump personally called Senator Susan Collins, a Republican who supported the resolution, and berated her with crude language and threats. Not argument, not reasoning, intimidation. That reaction matters far more than the vote itself because it reveals how Trump understands power, not as something delegated by law, not as something shared under the Constitution, but as something personal, something owned, something that others betray by limiting. That belief is the engine driving this revolt. To understand why this happened, the details matter. Trump has repeatedly and publicly floated the idea of using military force to acquire Greenland. On first hearing, this sounds absurd. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like exaggerated social media chatter. It is not. The President of the United States has explicitly suggested that military options are on the table to acquire territory that belongs to Denmark. Denmark is not an adversary. Denmark is a NATO ally, a treaty partner the United States is legally bound to defend. Senator Chris Murphy stated the implications plainly, and when he did, it sent shockwaves through the Senate. Article 5 of the NATO treaty establishes collective defense. An attack on one member is an attack on all members. Greenland is Danish territory. If the United States were to use military force against Greenland, it would not merely be attacking Denmark. It would be attacking the NATO alliance itself. That is not hyperbole, that is treaty law. This is the scenario lawmakers are now being forced to confront not as theory, but as possibility. An American president placing the country on a collision course with its own allies over territorial acquisition. This is not strategy. This is not diplomacy. This is not deterrence. In any previous era, this kind of rhetoric would have ended a political career overnight. But we do not live in that era anymore, and that is precisely what has Republicans alarmed. Once a president begins treating military force as a negotiation tactic, the machinery of war starts moving whether Congress approves or not. That is why the War Powers Act suddenly matters again. That is why Republicans crossed the aisle. They were not making a statement. They were trying to shut a door before it could be kicked open. To understand why Trump behaves this way, you have to understand how he views the world. Not the caricature, not the slogans, the actual operating logic. Trump does not think in terms of alliances. He does not think in terms of obligations. He does not think in terms of international law. He sees everything as a deal. Deals have leverage. Deals have winners and losers. Deals involve pressure, threats, and dominance. That logic works in real estate. It does not work in geopolitics. Nations have militaries. Alliances have tripwires. Statements by a president are not idle talk. They alter calculations instantly. When an American president says military force is on the table against Allied territory, that is not negotiation. That is a threat, and threats, once made, cannot be unmade with a tweet or a walk back. Republican senators understand this. Many of them have sat in classified briefings. They know how quickly situations escalate. They know that commanders must plan for contingencies whether or not the president follows through. They know that words create momentum. That is why they are afraid, not because they have become liberals, not because they suddenly despise Trump, but because they can see where this road leads and they do not want to be there when it ends. The War Powers Act exists for moments exactly like this. It was passed after Vietnam, when Congress realized that presidents had been dragging the country into wars without proper authorization. It requires consultation. It imposes time limits. It is an emergency brake. Republicans just pulled it. That brings us back to the phone call with Senator Collins. That call was not about one vote. It was a window into how Trump processes resistance. He does not see checks and balances as democracy working. He sees them as betrayal. He treats independence as treachery. That matters because how a leader responds to being told no tells you everything about how they will behave under pressure. Trump's entire second-term strategy is built on dominance. Total control, inevitability, the projection of power without limits. Nothing punctures that image faster than members of your own party voting against you in public. So he lashed out, and it did not work. Collins did not change her vote, neither did the others. They absorbed the pressure and moved on. That failure of intimidation is critical. It shows something Trump has never fully accepted. Political loyalty is conditional. It depends on mutual benefit. When the cost outweighs the reward, it evaporates. Right now, Republicans are doing the math. They see the war rhetoric, the emergency declarations, the chaos, and they are asking what they get in return. If the answer is only risk, the alliance fails. At the same time this war powers fight was unfolding, Trump declared a national emergency related to Venezuelan oil assets. On the surface, it sounds like energy security. Look closer and it collapses. The timeline for benefit is years. The infrastructure costs are enormous. The beneficiaries are multinational corporations, not consumers. So why declare an emergency? Because emergencies concentrate power. They bypass Congress, they short circuit oversight. Emergencies are meant for imminent threats. They are not meant to be governance tools. But that is exactly how they are being used. Every time scrutiny increases, a new crisis appears. The conversation shifts, accountability becomes obstruction, oversight becomes sabotage. This is not accidental, it is strategy. When everything is urgent, nothing is examined carefully. When every week brings a new emergency, the last one fades before questions are answered. This is how power avoids inspection. The Venezuelan oil emergency is not about oil, it is about control. While headlines focus on dramatic confrontations, a quieter pressure is building underneath: oversight. Documentation, timelines. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has been asking process questions. Why delays? Why missed deadlines? Why stalled reviews? These are not attacks. They are procedural inquiries, and administrations fear them more than speeches because procedures create records. Records become evidence. A speech fades, a document remains. Paper trails do not care about loyalty, they wait. When an administration promises transparency and fails to deliver, credibility erodes, and once credibility cracks, everything else follows. Oversight is not optional, it is how democracy functions. When a president treats oversight as warfare, the system destabilizes, and Republicans see the larger danger. Precedents do not disappear, they accumulate. Power claimed today is inherited tomorrow. Shortcuts become norms. This is not about Trump alone. It is about what comes next. If Congress allows these precedents to stand, future presidents will use them. Republicans understand that defending Trump today may empower someone they cannot control tomorrow. That is why lines are being drawn quietly, carefully, imperfectly, not out of ideology, but out of institutional self-preservation. This matters beyond Washington. Military families feel war rhetoric, workers feel unstable trade, allies feel uncertainty, markets respond, trust erodes slowly, then suddenly. The Greenland rhetoric is not just embarrassing. It is dangerous. It forces allies to reassess American reliability. It invites adversaries to test boundaries. It destabilizes systems people rely on. Where does this go? No one knows, but watch the signals. Watch whether the war powers resolution survives. Watch whether oversight continues. Watch whether the Republican coalition grows. Watch Trump's language escalate. Watch what happens to those who said no. This moment is not about personalities. It is about whether rules are stronger than individuals. Democracies fail when limits become optional. They survive when people enforce them. Right now, enforcement is happening. Not perfectly, not universally, but visibly, and that matters. The revolt is real. Emergency powers are being weaponized. Precedents are being set. Those are the facts. Everything else flows from them. Democracy does not defend itself. It depends on people choosing to defend it. Right now, some are doing that. The question is whether enough will. What happens next will tell us whether the system bends, breaks, or holds. And that is why this moment matters.